South African telecoms giant MTN Group has suspended dividend payouts from its Nigerian unit. Now, this comes amid allegations that it illegally moved $14 billion out of the country. Nigeria's upper house of parliament is carrying out investigations to establish whether the company unlawfully repatriated the money between 2006 and 2016. Now, MTN has denied the allegations. However, CEO Fedi Moolman has admitted before the Nigerian Senate that MTN did move funds without obtaining a certificate of capital importation. But he also maintains there wasn't any deliberate intent to flout Nigerian laws. Moolman says the company was compelled to do so due to circumstances that made it impossible for MTN to abide by Nigerian legislation at the time.
We needed to put down money before the vendors would supply us with equipment in advance. They wouldn't accept local currency. They wanted hard currency. And we had to take some money that was intended to bring in and to be converted and pay this in advance. Obviously, you can understand now when I get my CCI, I need to wait for the equipment to come in. To get the equipment in, I need to make 100% sure that I follow due process with the equipment. As you know, we're talking a lot of money and we're talking a huge investment in the country. For us to resolve those challenges didn't take a month, didn't take 2 months. It took close to 4 to 5 years to close those challenges.
Let's get an update on that situation. Our correspondent Deji Badmus now joins us in Lagos. Deji, as always, welcome to the show. Now, of course, we know the first investigative hearing into MTN began last week. MTN says that circumstances compelled it to move funds without observing Nigeria's law. Now, what are the highlights of that hearing?
Well, Uche, the highlights, of course, of the hearing, part of it you've heard from the CEO of MTN Nigeria, basically making it clear that it is true that the law requires that you should get a certificate of capital importation 24 hours before you bring in this capital, but that circumstances made it difficult for MTN to comply. Not in all cases, anyway, that in some cases. And one of the things also that came through during that hearing, the banks, actually, all the banks, virtually all of them confirmed that there was actually a problem with meeting that 24-hour requirement. Even the CBN itself confirmed that in some cases, some banks actually approached it to extend the 24-hour requirement, and that it did in some cases. So, the hearing is still going on. And of course, as you know, the Minister of Trade and Investment in Nigeria, who was also implicated in this whole thing, has denied that he did anything wrong. As a matter of fact, all the individuals involved are denying that they did anything wrong and that they did not do anything at all to benefit themselves, just like MTN has been saying that, it will not do anything against the interest of Nigeria, that it did not deliberately go out of its way now to flout Nigerian law, but that circumstances made it cost why it couldn't get that certificate of capital importation now 24 hours before it imported the capital into the country.
Well, Deji, we'll get a little bit more on that, but joining the conversation now in Johannesburg is Dobek Patel. He's the head analyst at Africa Analysis, and of course, he's joining us in Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Mr. Patel. Now, looking at how MTN has performed, we've seen its shares hit their lowest level in about 6 years since this issue surfaced. Now, how are investors and, of course, analysts viewing this cloud of uncertainty around MTN right now?
Good evening. Thanks very much for hosting me. Yes, I think unfortunately for MTN, it's had a number of developments that have acted against its share price, obviously towards negative investor sentiment. That started off last year, about a year ago approximately, with that fine due to lack of deregistration of SIM cards in Nigeria. And then once the share started recovering, it obviously has been now more recently impacted with the news that it has been illegally repatriating money out of Nigeria. So yes, the share has slipped quite a bit. I think in the past few weeks has probably gone down about 14% and continues to, it's stabilized today in Johannesburg after the release of the quarterly results for Q3, but depending obviously what transpires in terms of the newest development in Nigeria, the almost $14 billion that the Nigerian authorities claim have been repatriated illegally, it may come under further pressure and continue to decline. And unfortunately, in terms of the results, they weren't bad, but they were probably not good enough, sufficient enough to prop up any further negative news out of Nigeria in the short term.
Well, let's go back to Deji in Lagos for a moment. Deji, we know this situation has implicated a sitting minister and, of course, 4 local commercial banks. How do you expect events to unfold over the coming weeks?
Well, Uche, there are those who have actually looked at this situation and they've come out to say this might possibly be like a storm in a teacup, if you like. But we just have to wait and see. The bottom line of this case is the issue of capital importation. That certificate of capital importation that MTN was required to get 24 hours before bringing in the capital. And the only reason why MTN is accused of repatriating money out of this country to the tune of 14 billion, almost $14 billion now. I mean, $14 million now. Yeah, I think it should be between 14. Yeah, I think it should be that amount. The reason why it is accused of repatriating that huge amount of money was just because it did not get that certificate of capital importation now. But MTN is making it clear that yes, it is true, it did not get that certificate at the time it should have done so, but that it subsequently got the certificate. In this case, I suppose MTN is saying, it got like a backdated or post-dated certificate now, if you like, and that it did not repatriate any money at all outside of the country without going through the legal procedure. Now, going forward, what do we expect to see? Well, we just have to wait and see what happens. It depends on what the senators who are investigating this, what they think. And at the end of the day, of course, all the parties will make their submission. We've heard from MTN. We've not heard from the minister yet, even though he's issued a statement. At the end of the day, this committee of the Senate will have to report to the entire Senate. And, of course, the decision to be taken against MTN and the individuals involved will have to be decided by the entire Senate. But the way, if you ask my opinion, the way this is going, I think all of this will be resolved eventually without much ado.
Well, Mr. Patel, I'd like to get your insight as an analyst. At this stage MTN is at, what is the outlook for the company? Is there hope in terms of the company getting back to initial form?
Yeah, obviously it depends on a number of factors, as just explained. So currently it's the pending decision after the investigation with respect to that potentially illegal repatriation of funds out of Nigeria over the past 10 years. But I think overall, if we look at MTN as a group over the medium to longer term future, I think it's more positive rather than negative. Obviously it has, apart from these immediate challenges, administrative challenges perhaps, it's got competitive market challenges in a number of markets with potentially changing regulatory environments in South Africa, one of its 3 big markets, in terms of the new proposed ICT policy that we have seen recently. But MTN does play in a number of large markets that do hold promise. Nigeria is one of them. MTN cannot afford to leave Nigeria. I think the Nigerian government cannot afford to lose MTN. Right. Another market is Iran, obviously. There are a number of medium-sized markets that are in Africa, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, that have shown and continue to show, I think, growth potential. They obviously have becoming saturated in terms of basic voice services, but we are seeing a significant and consistent growth of data services. And I think apart from more consumer-orientated services, we are going then to see MTN also pushing more strongly into the business environment, business services through MTN Business, and expanding its wholesale offering. So I think going forward, MTN will continue to be one of the large players in Africa and into the Middle East region. And I think it's once it gets over these hurdles and through its internal restructuring program, particularly focusing on MTN Nigeria and MTN South Africa at the moment, I think we will see probably an improved performance from MTN.
Right. And I just want to hone in, Mr. Patero, on the local picture in South Africa. We know MTN did report a fall in third quarter user numbers due to a weaker showing. Is MTN South African business struggling?
So if we look at the quarterly update released today by MTN and focusing on the South African market specifically, yes, they have lost about approximately 140,000 subscribers over the past quarter, maybe 0.5% of the subscriber base, down to 29.7 million. But on the other hand, they have gained valuable subscribers, postpaid subscribers, the contract subscribers, and they have increased the average revenue per user by over 10%. So overall, revenue was up 3.3%, and data revenue has also increased, and data traffic has increased. It's now a significant contributor at about 34% to overall revenue. So I think despite the fact that there is a small subscriber loss, overall MTN did show, I think, positive rather than negative results for the South African operations. And we have to, when we look at the South African market specifically, there are two big players in the market, namely Vodacom South Africa and MTN South Africa. And if you track them over time, you will see that they almost offset each other. So Vodacom gains a bit of market share, number of subscribers, MTN loses them, and then the situation changes and Vodacom loses a few and MTN gains a few. So it's been like this over time, depending on what particular products and services are being introduced into market, what promotions are being run, and also on technology or network development. So, you know, looking back a few years, 2, 3, 4 years in the South African market, MTN did neglect some of its investment. It's been catching up. So Vodacom had the lead, the advantage, but MTN is now catching up on that.
Okay. Well, many thanks to both of you for joining us with those insights. Of course, Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos, and Mr. Dobek Patero joining us in Johannesburg.